All right, everyone. Welcome to our Section K forum. I am Liz Elliott. I am the co-chair of the New Orleans Safety and Justice Challenge Community Advisory Group. We want to thank everyone for being here and for tuning in for another series or session in our series. I want to thank all of our co-hosts, Court Watch Nola, Innocence Project New Orleans, SPLC, Action Fund, Louisiana Courts Matter, National Council of Jewish Women, League of Women Voters, OPD, Crescent City Media Group, and Urban League of Louisiana. So thanks to all of them for helping us get this together. I want to introduce to you our moderator, Will Snowden from Vera. He's going to be asking the questions. We've got two candidates with us tonight, Stephanie Bridges and C. Gary Wainwright. Marcus DeLarge had intended to participate, but had a family emergency, and so will not be able to join us this evening. So we wish him and his family well, and we're going to get our candidates on, and I will turn it over to Will.
Good evening, everyone. Really excited to be here for this conversation. My name is Will Snowden. Very happy to be here in my personal capacity. And as I moderate this conversation, I do so from a perspective of having practiced at Tulane and Broad Criminal District Court for 5 years as a public defender. Going to start off with an introduction of our two candidates, C. Gary Wainwright. Gary has practiced in the criminal court for over 3 decades, and he joined the Orleans Indigent Defender Program upon graduation and has defended citizens there for 2.5 years before going into private practice. Mr. Wainwright has represented more than 7,000 citizens, negotiated thousands of just plea bargains, conducted more than 750 trials, has tried 2 death penalty cases, and has conducted thousands of evidentiary hearings. Mr. Wainwright is also an accomplished appellate lawyer in the cases of State versus Schisler, State versus Skipper, and State versus Brazeley. Welcome, Mr. Wainwright.
Thank you for having me.
Ms. Bridges, Mrs. Stephanie Bridges is the president of the New Orleans Council for Community and Justice. She is currently a candidate for the Orleans Parish Criminal District Court, a former assistant city attorney in the law department of the city of New Orleans. Ms. Bridges received her Juris Doctorate from Loyola University of New Orleans College of Law. She has been an advocate for youth justice for more than 30 years. Her professional memberships include the Louisiana Bar Association and the National Association of Women Attorneys. She has also participated in numerous civic endeavors, including serving as a former board member of the Algiers Charter School Association, the Common Good Health Clinic in New Orleans, and as president, LACAG, the Lower Algiers Community Action Group. She has been a zealous advocate for youth justice and criminal justice reform for over 30 years. Welcome, Mrs. Bridges.
Thank you.
As we go through this conversation this evening for New Orleanians to learn more about your candidacy for Section K, as well as your qualifications for that seat, we have the encouragement that this is a respectful dialogue and discussion. Going to be opening things up with each candidate to give a basic, 1-minute introduction of yourself and why you're seeking this particular position. And we'll start with Mr. Wainwright.
Well, good evening, and I want to thank you all for hosting this forum where the citizens of New Orleans can learn who we are and why we want to serve. I have walked the criminal district court since January 3rd, 1990, 3 decades. I know what works and I know what doesn't work. In late July, I got the call to fight for justice again, this time by offering to serve as judge in Section K. I have a wonderful life, a great family, and a very successful law practice. At 67, as I see the crisis facing our city and our criminal justice system, I'm offering my experience and independence to serve this city as we fight back from COVID through the shakings of the foundation of our criminal justice system, to provide due process to those who have been jailed for nearly a year without setting foot in court. Those facing the charges deserve it, the victims deserve it, and the city demands it. Whether it's drug court, mental health court, reentry court, I'm ready to resume the responsibility based on my experience, my maturity of being actually in the criminal district court virtually every single working day for 3 decades to decide who needs a reprimand and who needs to be incarcerated. There is no candidate in this race who has the depth of experience that I have, or the love that I have for this city, or has dedicated their life to that building. And finally, the criminal justice in this city, the criminal justice conversation in this country and in this city is where Gary Wainwright has always been, and everyone who works in the criminal justice system who is familiar with this city knows that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. Mrs. Bridges, opening
Good
statement.
afternoon, and thank you so much for hosting this forum tonight. I believe that there are two kinds of people that want to create change. Those who want to tear the system down completely, and those change makers that choose to work within the system. I am the latter. I have been serving this community in a legal capacity for over 13 years. And as a mother of 4 young men and lover of the city my entire life, I can say confidently, I am in tune with what this city needs from the criminal justice system. Right now, our criminal justice system needs judges that understand how the system affects communities and that have the wisdom and understanding to make tough decisions to protect our families. When I say I'm tough but fair, I am acknowledging the very real criminal elements that threaten our community at large and the responsibility judges demonstrate when overseeing each case with the diligence, toughness, and fairness that this city and its citizens deserve. I am the clear choice for a judge of Criminal District Court, Section K.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges. And I'll be coming back to you for our first question and then Mr. Wainwright. As we know, we've been in a pandemic for the majority of 2020. And with that pandemic, the courts have closed. And that has also changed the ways in which people have access to the courtroom. My question is to you, thinking about how Court Watch Nola and thus the public have waited over a month to have access to the Zoom proceedings that occurred for the bail bond hearings. These Zoom proceedings have continued, but the public was only recently allowed to see them. The public has a right to access all court proceedings except in the rare case that the safety or the confidentiality of a defendant, survivor of crime, or witness is in danger. As judge, how would you ensure the public is never refused access to public court appearances again?
Well, I guess I want to start in this manner. I've followed up on Watch Nola. As a matter of fact, I sat in various criminal courtrooms myself, advocating for the parent of a defendant or for citizen groups regarding the entire criminal justice reform system. So I think it is imperative that the public is allowed to see what is going on within our criminal justice courts or system. As a judge, I would ensure that the public has access, except in those cases where, as you stated before, that it could be perilous for maybe the witnesses or the defendant or the jurors themselves. But I believe in having open access to the courtroom so that the public can gain a knowledge and an understanding of what is going on in our courtrooms.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges. Mr. Wainwright, same question. How would you ensure the public has access to our courtrooms?
Well, I would demand it. I would demand it. Unlike Ms. Bridges, I have spent my entire life dedicated to preserving citizens' constitutional rights. And those of us who know about the history of criminal law know there was a time in England when there was a place called the Star Chamber where they conducted trials in secret. And so that's why our forefathers enshrined in our Constitution the right to public trials. And so if I'm blessed and this city is blessed, and I have a seat at the table in that building with the other judges, you can be certain there will be a voice that will be speaking up for the constitutional rights of the accused and the constitutional rights of our citizens so they can understand what is happening to their family members and to their community. And I will never vary from that kind of belief.
A quick follow-up, Mr. Wainwright and Mrs. Bridges, I'll come to you as well after Mr. Wainwright. Thinking about how the court closures have really impacted the processing of cases, and inevitably we have a backlog that is going to have to get worked through. Can you talk to us about how you will approach the Section K docket, and if there has been backlogs because of the court closures, lead us through and kind of give us insight in how you're going to manage that responsibility, as it is inevitable for whomever assumes the Section K judgeship, along with all the other judges in that building. This kind of case backlog is going to be an issue.
Well, as I said in my opening statement, we have men who have been incarcerated who will not have actually set foot in court for nearly a year by the time we get back to normal operations. Plus, with Mr. Canizero and his 99% acceptance rate on charges, we have, and I wouldn't know the number, Mr. Snowden, but I imagine at this point it would be close to probably 1,000 people who have been charged who haven't set foot in the building. The first thing I would do is I would aggregate all of the drug cases, and I couldn't take and throw them into the garbage, but I would basically throw them into the garbage. The normal drug case in the criminal district court involves less than $100 worth of drugs. So hopefully when we get a new district attorney in January, all of that garbage will be flushed out of the system. And then we can focus on providing justice to those who have been accused of serious crimes and to those victims. Now, whether or not the right person has been accused of a crime is a question that has to be addressed in court. But I think we're all very confident in knowing that there are actually real victims of crimes and they deserve their day in court. So, you know, I've been in the building for 3 decades. I know what works and I know what doesn't work. I know we got people running for DA who want to be really progressive. I know that when we come in there, everybody's going to be grabbing their butt saying, I just got hired and I don't know anything about this case and I need a continuance and I need to. It's not going to play that way. We've got people who have been sitting in jail right now 2 and 3 years waiting for their trials. And so, okay, you're the new DA. Okay, you ran for this job. Okay, you got 120 days to bring this case to trial, or I'm going to put this person at home on electronic home incarceration till you find out how you plan to deal with your responsibilities. Because a judge's responsibility is to guarantee a citizen their constitutional rights to a speedy trial. And so that's how I intend to address the backlog of cases.
Mrs. Bridges, same question, knowing the kind of the backlog that inevitably will be one of your responsibilities if elected to Section K. Can you give us some insight on how you would handle that backlog?
All right, as previously stated, everyone has a constitutional right to a speedy trial. And how I plan on managing my docket would be that it would have to start with me. I would have to be present. I want to schedule the cases well in advance so that the prosecution, the defense attorney, including myself, will be prepared to move forward. And that's how I'm going to address the previous the previous backlogs, because they had backlogs before this time. But it starts with the judge ensuring that everybody's constitutional right to a speedy trial is granted. And that's what I plan to do. I plan to be present and make certain that I'm knowledgeable about the cases, as well as the defense and the prosecution, period.
Ms. Bridges, excuse me, Mrs. Bridges, I'm going to stay with you and going to pivot the conversation a little bit to the matter of race. And we think about how 2020 has been a lot of things, and a lot of things have been bubbling up to have different conversations, whether it's with policing, whether it's with end policing, whether it's immigration, whatever it might be. But bringing this to New Orleans, if we were to peel back the roof of our jail today, of New Orleanians. Can you talk to us about what you will do to reduce obvious racial and ethnic disparities in treatment by the court system in New Orleans?
Okay, my video, you stopped for a brief second, so I didn't hear the entire.
Sorry about that. That's my internet. Sorry, I'll ask it again, just real short. What will you do to reduce obvious racial and ethnic disparities in treatment by the court system in New Orleans?
Okay, as the mother of 4 young men, I understand the difficulties that is facing our community, the Black community, I should state. I know that right now, the current defendants are getting younger and younger. When in my present job, I found it, I work with the young people, and the whole purpose of that is to prevent them from going into the criminal justice system. I know that some of them are suffering from mental health issues, drug addiction, unemployment, and poverty. One of the ways that I hope to, if I'm lucky enough to be elected as judge, what I want to do is to continue those programs addressing those specific needs to keep the younger generation who are becoming incarcerated in this city, addressing those needs, addressing, again, the mental health, the drug addiction, the homelessness, and the unemployment. And by addressing those needs, I think I can help keep the younger people outside of the criminal justice system, help them to work within our community and become positive young people. And that's what I do.
Thank you. And I'll come to you in a second, Mr. Wainwright. As a quick follow-up, Mrs. Bridges, can you give us insight into your authority as a judge and what it is you can do from the bench in your courtroom that might give us insight into how you address those disparities?
Well, right now, I believe what I can do in the courtroom is, look at alternative ways of sentencing without compromising the integrity of the courtroom or the safety of the community while still addressing the harm. And right now there's a lot of drug addiction arrests that's occurring. And we can deal with that. We can deal with that through the direct court, excuse me. So I want to look at alternative ways of sentencing young people to help them to, I guess, move along a continuum where they could be successful adults in our community and to help build up our community.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges. The question to you, Mr. Wainwright, what will you do to reduce obvious racial and ethnic disparities in treatment by the court system in New Orleans?
Well, I don't know about by the court system, but, this is who I am. No more drug war. I've spent 30 years working to build a coalition nationally that now has come into fruition over the past 7 years and has had people like the Koch brothers get involved to understand the insanity of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of imprisoning normally Black men for $20 worth of drugs. The systemic racism that is built into the American policing and the drug war are not something that a judge can really address from the bench. Now, a judge can speak publicly. A judge can educate other judges, legislators, and hopefully the public about the true nature of the systemic racism that the drug war is. Several years ago, I wrote an outline for a book, and I named the book The New Jim Crow. And that outline and that book title were given to a law professor named Michelle Alexander. And the book, The New Jim Crow, is an international phenomenon. And actually, the phrase Jim Crow has come back into the vernacular of the conversation in our country about systemic racism. This is who Gary Wainwright is. Now, Ms. Bridges' statement about offenders in criminal court getting younger, she would have no idea on earth or any factual basis to make any such statement, because Stephanie Bridges has never represented anybody in criminal court in a felony case. She's never tried a felony case. She's never represented anybody in a felony case. Certainly she wasn't in a criminal court in 1990 or 2000 or 2010. It's 2020. So offenders are not getting any younger. Accused people aren't getting any younger. I was representing 17-year-olds accused of murder in the 90s. So I appreciate the context of the question, Mr. Snowden, but I hope I've answered it in a way that seems slightly rational, if not irrational.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. Mrs. Bridges, I want to give you an opportunity to respond. Mr. Wainwright shared his perspective as it relates to your involvement or what it might have been at criminal district court, and just wanted to hold some space for you to respond if you'd like.
I would. Mr. Wainwright needs to do his homework. Okay. Currently, right now, I'm representing a United States Marine who was falsely accused of a felony. And what I was just with him and his mother and father the other day, and one of the things that they said to me was the fact that I stayed in communication with them. I'm passionate about the work that I do when I work with people, when I'm defending people against, in court. So I would suggest, Mr. Wainwright, do your homework before you state something that isn't true.
Ms. Bridges, the other night.
Excuse me, sir, I did not interrupt you.
Mr. Wainwright, 1 second, I'll come to you in a minute.
He needs to do his homework. I've done both civil and criminal cases in multiple parishes, in district as well as appellate court. So I do know what I'm doing. I do know what I'm talking about. There was a 15-year-old in this city who was arrested for murder recently. They are getting younger, and we need to be mindful. I work with that community. I work with the young people for the past 30 years, and I continue to work with them. So I know what is happening in our community. Thank you, Mr. Snowden.
Mr. Wainwright.
Mr. Snowden, I just want to make it perfectly clear. The video is posted in the Voters East of the Industrial Canal Forum. Ms. Bridges, who had said things contradictorily, actually responded when she was asked, how many criminal jury trials have you conducted? She said, honestly, I have to tell you, I've never done one. And the case that she's referring to, that she likes to drag up as her history of representing people accused of crimes, the last time she told us that story, she told us it was a case in Baton Rouge. And your question was, what kind of cases have you handled in the criminal district court? From arraignment through to completion, Name one felony case that you've ever represented anyone, and the answer is none.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. The voters will be able to review the video that you're referencing. I haven't seen it myself.
It's posted on my Facebook page. They sent it to me yesterday, and I wanted to make certain that people had the ability to see the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. I do want to, when we have conversations about race, we talk about the criminal legal system, we often talk about the experience of Black men, and oftentimes the experience of women gets left out of that conversation. As we know, national trends indicate that girls and women are one of the highest growing populations of people who are being incarcerated. Mr. Wainwright, I'll start with you. Being aware of this trend, what are the types of mechanisms or mental models that you might have in mind as a presiding judge, aware of this growing population of incarcerated people, but also understanding what authority you do or do not have leading from the bench to address this concern?
I want to make certain everybody knows this. I am Hispanic. My mother immigrated from Cuba. I was discriminated against as a child. I was punished in the 50s if I spoke Spanish. And I had a sister that was as dark as Miss Bridges. And so I experienced racism directly. I had crosses burned in the front yard of my family's home twice by the KKK because I played with the colored children, and my family wouldn't stop me from doing it. I'll never forget when my daddy bought a 38 Special after they burned the second cross in our front yard. And my mother made him take it back because she said, Carl, one of the kids will shoot each other with that. It's a horror. The criminalization of poverty and the stealing of all the wealth of this country by the top 1%, and the use of the criminal justice system while we have the criminal in chief in the White House to punish people. Look at the man who got killed for trying to pass a counterfeit $100 bill, George Floyd. At a point in time when the government had just created $6 trillion in phony money and pumped it into the economy, and Wall Street's higher than ever, but a black man tries to allegedly use a fake $100 bill and he gets the death penalty. This is the world we're living in. What will I do? I'm a human being. I have a heart as big as the planet Earth, and I love people. And I'm not going to see anybody unnecessarily hurt for no legitimate reason by the cops, by the DA. Everybody who's ever set foot into criminal district court knows who Gary Wainwright is. I'm not somebody who's running a nonprofit, who does any racism seminars, who's never set foot in the building, who sees a chance to get a job with a paycheck. That's not who Gary Wainwright is. I'm 66 years old. I gave up a career in international trade and finance to come to the criminal district court to fight for black men who were accused of having 1/10 of a gram of cocaine. And so now they want to start bringing black women into court and accusing them of stuff. If there's any way for me as a judge, and believe me, I know all the ways that a judge can do things legally. It's not going to happen in Section K if the city of New Orleans trusts me to be the judge.
Mrs. Bridges, same question. As national trends indicate, women and girls being one of the fastest growing populations of people who are being incarcerated, given the structure of the criminal code and authority that you do have, or things that you want to do from the bench, can you talk to us about how you would address that concerning statistic?
There's not much you can do from the bench in addressing the statistics other than when I talk to you about sentencing and looking at those particulars. But what I can do outside of the bench is to work on those issues with various groups to address the current climate with the young ladies and the older women coming in. I can work, as I said again, with social organizations to address the needs of those young women and what is happening to cause them to get into the.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges. Now I'm going to pivot to judicial system funding. And this year, I believe it was Act 110, legislation was authored and supported by current criminal district court judges to change the way in which bail fees and conviction fees support the expenses of the court. And the new law gives judicial discretion as it relates to conviction fees. And there's been a resolution that was passed by City Council within the last month, also looking at the role that money should be playing in terms of funding our criminal justice system at Tulane and Broad. As a judge, how will you use your discretion to assess conviction fees, and will you impose conviction fees on those who are deemed indigent?
Okay, one thing I want to state, I want to applaud the City Council for passing the resolution to address, court fees and fines. And I think what they stated in the resolution is that for every $1 that a judge imposed upon a defendant, the city would withhold $2 from the budget. So I think that's a step in the right direction to address this situation. I think we have to look at the defendant's ability to pay whenever we're looking at fines or fees. Because as you state, it is, because as I should state that could be looked at as criminalizing poverty. And that's something that we don't need to do. The defendants already go through hurdles and challenges when they have to pay legal fees to their attorneys, when they have to pay an additional fine or fee. It's not only burdensome to the defendant himself, but to the family members as well. Because number one, that takes away from housing, that takes away money from housing, money from food, money from transportation, the like. And if that person is the one sustaining member of the family that actually brings in the bacon, so to speak, it could also have a disparaging effect on childcare. So me as a judge, if I'm lucky to be one, I would look at the defendant's ability to pay before I impose any type of fine or fee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges. Mr. Wainwright, same question. With the new law passed this year, giving additional judicial discretion to impose conviction fees, will you impose conviction fees on those who are deemed indigent and represented by a public defender? And how will you assess and make that determination?
Well, as a person who's been a thought leader in the criminal justice system in Louisiana, which, believe me, 30 years ago, it wasn't very hard to be liberal in Louisiana, okay? I have always been consistently, for decades, the person challenging the status quo in terms of the way the criminal court is working. I'll never forget, back in 1990, I was assigned to Miriam Walters' court. I was a new lawyer. And, they wanted you to, move the docket. Move the docket. Oh, it's a simple possession of cocaine. He has no priors. The judge says, 2 and 2. Sign him up, Mr. Wainwright. And I'm going, wait a minute. This is a felony. I'm not signing this guy up for a felony for your convenience. Oh, and I'll give him this and that. I said, wait a minute. You're making this man a convicted felon so he can't get a job. Then you're telling him he's got to pay you money or you're going to put him in jail. What kind of shit show are you running here? Well, the judge wasn't really happy when I said that. Of course, I'd only been in the building about a week, and I'm going like, this isn't working. I'm not doing this. No indigent person, and I mean really indigent, will pay a penny to be prosecuted. This concept is insane. It's insane. Now, the criminal code and many of its statutory penalties, and I have negotiated these, I've represented 8,000 people. I've negotiated thousands of plea bargains. And when you're sitting there convincing a person that they have to take 15 years in prison, that they're going to serve 13 years on, or they're going to get natural life, if people don't trust you and believe you, then you can't do this job. You can't do it. And when you're a judge and you're trying to decide whether it's 3 years or 4 years or 7 years, you have to have the background of having, or not, I guess in Mrs. Bridges' case, you don't, but of understanding what you're doing. Understanding what you're doing. No one will pay to be prosecuted. However, every statute says, for instance, 2 years in jail or a $1,000 fine. Me, I'll tell people, I'm going to give you a $50 fine. If it comes down to you being a convicted felon, you got a $50 fine. Pay your $50, walk out of here, you're through with this building, I'll never see you again. The use of probation to control black men's lives, it's modern day friggin' slavery with a nice wrapper put around it. Because when you're on probation, they kick in your door, or they have permission to come in your house without a warrant and search it. Okay, your car, your mother's room, invade your, it's insanity. What we do to people for $10 and $15 worth of drugs. It's not going to happen in Gary Wainwright's courtroom. No one is going to go to jail. I'm got to go to court tomorrow in Jefferson Parish for a kid that a judge over there is trying to put in jail because he hasn't paid $100 out of a $1,600 fine that some other lawyer convinced him to accept for possession of 3 grams of marijuana. And this case will have been on that docket 10 times to collect $1,600. And the judge is threatening, this is an old weed case, she's threatening to give him 6 months in jail if he doesn't pay the $100. The 6 months in jail is going to cost $15,000. What kind of system spends $15,000 to collect $100? So I've been there. I've been in the trenches. I've been in court with you, Mr. Snowden. You know the kind of person I am. So I would bring my experience and who I am to being a judge, and I would be having conversations like this. You see, when I've been in court talking to judges as a lawyer, Well, they're always able to lord over me because A, they're seated higher in the room, and B, they're wearing a robe. When I'm wearing a robe, they're not going to be able to ignore what I'm saying to them about the changes that need to be made.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. I want to pivot to this idea that you can't manage what you don't measure, and thinking about how the court can have feedback loops for the work that they're doing, judges, the decisions that they're making. Can you talk to us about what feedback loops, and I'll start with you, Mr. Wainwright, what feedback loops would be valuable for you as a judge to be able to do things, double down on good practices that you've been able to establish, but then secondarily look at areas in which you might need to correct your decisions?
Well, I want to say that, I was around in the building when this new organization came into the building called Court Watch Nola. And I have seen Court Watch Nola grow up as an organization. And I think that the current way the program's organized, it provides extremely valuable information to the public and to the court. Now, of course, you have the juror questionnaires that are filled out at the end of every month by jurors. And I've had the pleasure of reading some of those over the 30 years I've been in the building. And some of them are pretty funny and some of them are pretty sad. I mean, in fact, there was one judge who, for many, many years, the jurors actually said he is an A, and then, the word that goes with that, like a behind. He's a behind. And I mean, this went on. The person didn't change how they behaved. It was like they couldn't care. I had a judge one time, a juror filled out a questionnaire and actually filed a bar complaint against him because of the way he treated a lady lawyer who happened to be my wife, who I had associated to try a rape case. And not only did the juror file a bar complaint against the judge, a judiciary complaint, they made a formal complaint through the jury pool. What was that judge's reaction in terms of a feedback loop? He called me into his office and started MFing me about what I had done to him when I brought a woman lawyer into his courtroom. So, there are certainly tools. Now, the other thing is, I am not a believer in rushed justice. I'm not a believer that you can tell the quality of a judge by how fast he moves his docket. And I actually know, some people haven't figured this out yet, that with the current district attorney or even other district attorneys, and they have judges that they like more than other judges, and they make plea bargains in their sections to lower their docket and make that judge look good. It's a mess. It's a mess. But, certainly any metric that can be devised by Vera or by any other think tank or organization that would help me judge whether I was being a better person than I currently am at my job, I would be just happy to have.
Mrs. Bridges, same question. You can't manage what you don't measure. Thinking about ways in which the court can incorporate feedback loops to do two things, give you information about things you're doing well, as well as decisions you might want to adjust. Can you talk to us about what would be valuable from the bench in terms of what feedback loops can look like?
Well, thank you for the question. Court watchers would be one of the tools that I would look at, but also in my platform, I have an advisory committee that would contain members of both the faith community as well as the community members at large, just so that I can have or have a pulse as to what is going on in our community, how they feel about certain actions that are taking place in my courtroom, and ways that they see that I could become a more, I guess, a better administrator. So I would look to those entities to monitor the way that I am working within the court system.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges. And this next question is we'll start with you as well. Thinking about the 12 different criminal district court judges we have for Orleans Parish Court, Criminal District Court, can you give us your perspective, and not talking about a specific individual judge, but generally, from your perspective, what has the court gotten right over the last 10 years? And what are the things that maybe the court has gotten wrong over the last 10 years, and how you would lead to bring some of that change that you've identified?
Okay. Well, I can, to say about what has the court gotten right or what have they gone wrong, I could say I could look at the judges, look at the strengths that I see in them, and also look at some of the weaknesses. And one of the things that I would want to do is emulate their strength and then learn from their weaknesses. So there's not one specific thing that I can point to within the past 10 years, I believe you stated the question was, but I can certainly look at the judges that are on the bench right now, see what it is that they do well, emulate that, and improve upon those things that I see as weaknesses.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges. Same question to you, Mr. Wainwright. Again, with not bringing to attention to a specific judge, but generally over the last 10 years from your perspective, what has the court gotten right over the past 10 years, and what are things they may have gotten wrong?
Well, it'd be awfully hard for Ms. Bridges to have any actual opinion about that because she hasn't set foot in the courthouse in the past 10 years, unless maybe she walked up and down the hall one day on the way to sit in the audience. You know, that's a very difficult question because we have developed some programs. We have the Veterans Court program, which Judge Hunter started or, initiated. We have the mental health court now, which is good. I'm the person that brought drug courts to Louisiana in the early 90s from the Drug Policy Foundation, which I will now call the Drug Policy Alliance, which I have been one of the thought leaders globally in addressing the systemic problems caused by the racist war on drugs. So certainly when a criminal court, it's a machine. And in one part of the machine, you feed in people, and then you're supposed to sort them into the innocent and guilty. And on the other end of the machine is punishment. That's the American model. Now, beginning in the mid-90s, a number of us, it was called and is still called the harm reduction movement. And it was to decrease the harm done to people by the drug laws and decrease the harm that the criminal justice system does to people when they're being chewed up and spit through the machine. So, am I glad to see drug courts? Yes. Am I glad to see veterans courts? Yes. Am I glad to see mental health court? Yes. Do I think that those responsibilities should be housed within the criminal justice system? No, I do not. One of the things I've seen change over the course of the past 10 years is a decreased reliance on fines and fees. Of course, to the point now where virtually most of the judges impose no fines, and there's some mandatory fees, like one that's stupid, $20 for drug courts, that is not waivable under any circumstances. Well, seemingly regularly now, that one gets waived too. But the judges are human beings. They're a part of our city, and they understand what's going on in our society. But the difference for them, between them and me, is they're now having the scales removed off their eyes. I've been the man with the crowbar trying to pry the scales off their eyes for 30 years. So the criminal court, when I started, we had the 3 strikes life law, which any 3 felonies was natural life. And we did between 400 and 500 criminal jury trials a year, and people got life in prison for 1/10 of a gram of cocaine. And I helped get that law taken off of the books back in the 90s when Mr. Connick it was the 8th man that he gave natural life for cocaine residue that broke the straw for what was the 7th broke the straw. The 8th is where I figured out how I was going to bring it to an end. And we got that law changed, and that didn't happen again. So the building is plainly much less brutal than it was 30 years ago. I'm confident that people who've never been in the building think it's insanely brutal now. It is insanely brutal now. And a lot of that has to do with our Louisiana legislature, and it has to do with the 13th Amendment's slaving cause, and it has to do with Louisiana's history as a slave trading center in the United States. Have we made progress to a more just system? Yes. Are we there? No. Will I continue to be the person I always have been? I will continue to try and make that building work justice. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. I have one last question for each of you before we go into the 1-minute closing remarks. And this is a non-criminal justice related question. It's to allow voters to give a little peek into the person that you are. And the question is, if you had a favorite movie from your childhood, or even maybe a recent movie, what's that movie? If you could just give us the title of that movie and why it's your favorite movie. And if you can just keep it short, because we're at the end of time. I do want to give voters a little bit of insight into who you are as a person outside of your criminal justice hats that you might wear. So I'll start with you, Mrs. Bridges.
I think it's just funny. I've been watching Black Panther over and over again because of Mr. Chadwick Boseman. And it's like an empowering movie where it allows people who don't have a voice to have a voice in the fact that they can see themselves as a superhero. And so I constantly watch it because it reminds me of people's thoughts when they think they know a person or a country, and they have no idea because they never ventured outside of their walls to even find out about a segment of the community. And so that's why I love it, because it's empowering. It makes you want to be the best person that you can be. And I'm fun, and I like fun.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges. Mr. Wainwright, same question to you. A favorite either childhood movie or maybe movie that you've seen recently?
Well, in terms of favorite movie that means a lot to me, 12 Angry Men. Though I guess, I'm 66 and I'm dating myself because most people will have never heard of that movie, but it's a Henry Ford movie about a jury.
Henry Fonda.
Henry Fonda, thank you, Will. A young man is on trial, but you never see the accused person. But it's 12 white men are the jury, because back then in the 60s, only white men could be on the jury. And, it's a great movie. Of course, I love To Kill a Mockingbird. People often forget that in To Kill a Mockingbird, he didn't win the trial. He lost that trial. Now, in terms of new things, actually, when the pandemic started, I have a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. My daughter's name is Nola. My son's Gary. I love them very much. I want them to live in a safe city. I bought a package that had every Marvel movie, every single one of them. And we have watched them in chronological order, not order of release. And I think we still have 3 to go to. And as I told the kids, at $50 a pop, I had spent probably $1,500 bringing them to see all of those movies when they came out. And Black Panther's incredible. And I just would tell anybody, and Miss Bridges, we can agree on that. If you watch Black Panther now, if you watch it now, as opposed to when it came out 2 years ago, there are so many things in that movie that address systemic racism and actually the King's brothers, like in the Black Panther Party in the 60s, plotting an armed revolution against the white oppressors. And, you know, but before what's happened the last year, it really didn't catch your attention the way it does if you watch it now, when they're talking about the grinding racism that we have suffered through. Lyndon Johnson said when he passed the Voting Rights Act in 1964, we have lost the South for at least 50 years. And look at where we are today. All over the South, we have these Republican legislatures that are just viciously classist and racist. And we're going to have to, as a society, reach down inside ourselves and find the kind of strength that John Lewis had. And we're going to have to get in some good trouble if we want to see things come out positive this year and next year for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. We are at time. You each will have 1 minute for closing arguments. I will, in the spirit of primacy and recency, started with you, Mr. Gary Wainwright. You can give your closing argument first, and then Mrs. Bridges will have her closing argument. And I haven't done this throughout the evening's conversation, but this is the only time where I'm going to try to keep us tight to the 1 minute. And so I'll have my 1 minute timer. When you hear that going off, just wrap up if you don't mind. So Mr. Wainwright, closing argument, closing representation, speaking to the voters of New Orleans and why you're seeking Section K as the judge and why they should vote for you.
First of all, I want to thank everyone who's taken the time out of their lives tonight to participate in this forum. In July, I saw something catastrophic happening in the building that I love. I saw 3 people running to become judges in the criminal district court, none of whom were qualified to be judges in the criminal district court. One of the people wasn't legally qualified, and I litigated all the way to the Louisiana Supreme Court to get her disqualified. And that left the other 2 people who don't have the background, experience, or the relationship with this community that I have running for judge. People in this community know me, they know who I am, and I believe they will trust me to be a fair judge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. Mrs. Bridges, same question or same opportunity for you, closing arguments, speaking to the voters of New Orleans, why they should vote for you for Section K and why you're seeking this particular judgeship.
In this day and age, I am the only candidate with the qualifications and experience in both criminal and civil law and community service. I will be an honest, fair, impartial, but firm criminal court judge. I have worked as both a government employed and private practice attorney. I've also worked as a community leader and an executive director of a local nonprofit for over 24 years, working intimately with business, community, faith leaders on these issues that are polarizing us today. As a mother of 4 young men, I know the importance of feeling and being safe. I live this reality every day. I am the clear choice to serve as judge for Criminal District Court, Section K. I ask you for your support, but more importantly, for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bridges. To Mr. Wainwright, Mrs. Bridges, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure to be part of this conversation with you both. I'm going to pass things over to Ms. Elliott.
Thank you again, Will, and both our candidates, Gary and Stephanie. We really appreciate you guys being here. Thanks to all of the people who've been tuning in on both here on Zoom and on Facebook. Really appreciate it. Our next set of forums is tomorrow night. We've got 2 back-to-back, 6 p.m. We've got Section L, followed immediately at 7 by Magistrate Court. So we hope to see you then. Thanks again to everyone and all of our co-hosts, and have a great night.
You too.